Hello, ladies and gentlemen. These are your notes for Lesson 2-8, Dimensional Analysis. So we have talked a lot about percentages. We've talked a lot about discounts and taxes. We talked about proportions, where you have to cross-multiply. The last type of equation that we're going to talk about are equations that have lots and lots and lots of variables in them. Meaning, I won't just have x's in my equations, or I won't just have b's in my equations. I might have x's, y's, and z's in the same equation that I need to solve. So I want you to remember that if we are going to solve an equation, we are trying to isolate the variable. Okay, that's the whole goal. We're trying to get that variable by itself. So if I go ahead and put a whole bunch of variables in these equations, you are just going to try and isolate the one that I tell you to. So for example, if you look at number 1 here, you see that there are n's and p's in this equation. Over there in parentheses, you see the n. So that means I want to solve for n. So I want to isolate that n right there. So what is farthest away from that n on the same side? The 6p. That whole term can be moved over to the other side. Okay, I don't have to divide by p. I don't have to divide by 6. I want to take that whole 6p, this whole thing right here, and I want to move it over there. Well, that 6p is being added. So in order for me to move it over, I'm going to subtract it from both sides. I want you to notice that the 15 and the minus 6p cannot be combined. They are not like terms. So I'm going to write them separately. And I still have the 3n over there. Now, if I still want to isolate this n, I got to get rid of the 3. In order to get rid of the 3, I'm going to divide. So I get n equals, now both 15 and 6 are divisible by 3, so I'm going to go ahead and divide those. 15 divided by 3 is 5, and 6 divided by 3 is 2, and that has a p on it. Folks, you have to divide both of those terms by 3, or reduce them. If they don't divide, try and reduce them. But there I've isolated the n like I was asked to do, and that's done. If I take a look at number 2 over here, I've got b's and c's. Over in parentheses, you see the b, so I want to isolate that b. If I'm going to isolate the b, I want to get rid of this 12c, and I want to move it over to that side. Well, it's a positive 12c, so in order to move it, I'm going to subtract it over. 5b is equal to 9 minus 12c. The c cannot go with the 9 because the 9 does not have a c on it. Now in order for me to solve for b, to isolate it, I have to divide by 5. b equals. Now you will notice that neither 9 or 12 will divide by 5, and you cannot reduce 9, 12, and 5 by the same number. So we're just going to leave it like this. I also want you to be aware another acceptable answer is to show that you would have to divide both of those by 5. So you could either leave it as this big fraction like that, or you can leave it as 2 little fractions like that. All right, looking at number 3 here, you see the k is in parentheses. So I want to isolate this k right there. So the first thing I want to get rid of is that 5 in the denominator. So I need to multiply it over. K minus 2 is equal to. Now remember, we do not have to have like terms in order to multiply. So I can go ahead and multiply that 11j and the 5 together, and I get 55j. Now in order to isolate the k, I have to get rid of that 2, so I will add it. Remember, when we are adding, we do have to have like terms. So that 55j and the 2 cannot go together. It would look like that. My k is now isolated, and that would be my answer. In number 4, the knee-jerk reaction for a lot of kids is to distribute the t. please don't distribute the t. It's in parentheses over there, so that means I'm trying to get this by itself. If I'm trying to get that by itself, I need to move this whole thing over there. Okay, now you'll notice it's in parentheses, so it's all together, and I can move that entire thing at once because that parentheses is being multiplied by the t. So if I want to move it over, I can just divide it over because it was being multiplied by the t. So I have t is equal to 28 over r plus 4. Now, I want you to note that you cannot, I repeat, you cannot rewrite this like that. That is made up math. You cannot separate a denominator like that and split it into two fractions. Okay? Please do not try and do that. You also cannot reduce just the 28 and the 4. Okay? If you're going to reduce, you have to have common factors. Okay, and we will talk about that when we get into the factoring section, which I believe is chapter 8. But you cannot just reduce those, folks. Okay, you have to have factors of everything if you want to cancel things out. Okay, if we look at number 5, I want to isolate the q. You'll notice this time the q is on the inside of the parentheses. So I think I would like to get rid of this a first over here. Now the a is being multiplied by the q minus 8, so I'm going to divide by the a. And I get q minus 8 is equal to 23 over a. Now, notice I didn't need the parentheses over there anymore because there's nothing outside of it. So now to solve for q, I'm going to add the 8. And that 8 needs to be added to that whole fraction. So I'm putting that off to the side. Please do not put it down just in the denominator with the a. Okay, that needs to go off to the side as being added to the whole thing. In number 6, I'm trying to isolate the a. This time you will notice there are two a's, so I need to get them together. Okay, it does not matter which way you move them. If you're conditioned to move the smaller one over, then we will add it over. Notice that those are like terms, so I get 13a plus c is equal to 0 over here. Now if I want to isolate the a, I need to get rid of the c. So we'll subtract it. I have 13a is equal to negative c, and my last step here will be divide by 13 on both sides, and I get a is equal to negative c over 13. Now, folks, there's a lot of ways to write this. I could make this a equals negative 1/13 c. That means the same thing. You could even put that negative symbol down in the denominator. That would be okay as well. So there's tons of different answers. I shouldn't say different answers. Tons of different ways you can represent that answer. All right, let's do one more here before we head to your handout. I want to isolate the k. So the first thing I need to get rid of is that minus 7. It's being divided. So we will multiply. I have k plus m is equal to, if I multiply those together, I get negative 7n. Now to isolate for that k, I'm going to get rid of the m. If I am subtracting, those cannot go together. They have to stay separate, and that will be my answer. So when there's lots of variables, folks, we're just trying to isolate the one that they tell you to. Okay? All right, let's move over to that handout. And let's look at some ways that we can apply this. This is talking about geometry. The formula for the volume of a rectangular prism is V equals LWH, where L is the length, W is the width, and H is the height. So if I'm going to find basically the volume of a box or a rectangular prism, they're calling it, volume is length times width times height. It says solve the formula for W. So if I take a look at this formula over here, I want to get this W by itself, which means I need to get rid of the L and the H. Well, both the L and the H are being multiplied, so we can divide by both the L and the H. And you get V over LH is equal to W. Okay, those L's canceled, the H's canceled, and we just have the W. Now it says find the width of a rectangular prism that has a volume of 79.04, a length of 5.2, and a height of 4. So now we're going to plug all of these things in, and then it's going to tell us what the width is. So there's my volume they told me. They told me the length was 5.2. They told me the height was 4. Okay, so there is what my new equation will look like when I plug it in. So when you're doing this, make sure that you type everything in properly. Remember, this is going to be equal to W. I am getting W is 3.8, and this would be centimeters. 3.8 centimeters. Now I will remind you that that is a numerator over denominator, so you have to find the entire denominator first, so the 5.2 times 4, and then you have to take the 79.04 divided by that. You have to keep that entire denominator together. So you either need to put that in parentheses in your calculator when you divide by it, or you find out first that 5.2 times 4 is 20.8, and then you'll do that 79.04 divided by that 20.8. Okay, number 2, we're talking about fuel economy. A car's fuel economy, or miles per gallon, is given by the formula E equals m over g, where m is the number of miles driven and g is the number of gallons of fuel used. Solve the formula for m. Well, if I want to get this m by itself, I got to get rid of the g. So we are going to multiply it. I have E G is equal to M. If Quanta's car has an average fuel consumption of 30 miles per gallon, so that would be the E, and she has used 9.5 gallons, that's your G, how far did she drive? How many miles did she drive? So now that I have that M already isolated, I can just plug these numbers in. I get M is equal to 285 miles. A soap company wants to use a cylindrical container to hold their new liquid soap. Solve the formula for H. Please notice if I want to hold the soap, if I'm going to fill this with soap, it's a volume. So you see your volume formula there. If I want to solve it for H, I have to get rid of the pi and the r squared. Those are being multiplied. So we're going to divide them. I get V over pi r squared is equal to H. Now they're going to give me all of the other stuff to plug in. The volume is 56.52. The radius is 1.5. Now remember, pi is a number, and you should have a pi button on your calculator. We are not going to use 3.14 for pi. That is not the full representation for pi. So the first thing I'm going to do is figure out what pi times 1.5 squared is. And I am getting this. Now there's a whole bunch of decimals after that, and I'm going to keep those on there because in my calculator I can pull back my answer. And please remind me in class tomorrow to show you how to do this. So I'm going to take my 56.52 and divide it by the answer that I just got. And I get 7.9959. Now it says round to the nearest tenth, and if I do that, that will round up to 8, and we are talking inches here for the height of my cylinder. All right, I would like you to take a look at both of these problems, and I want you to tell me who is correct. Okay, who has properly solved for B? It looks like the only difference is the negative on that 5 in the denominator of the answer. Okay, I believe that Sandria is correct because when she subtracted the 4a from both sides and dropped this down, she remembered to drop down her negative sign, where Fernando did not. He lost a negative sign here. So Sandria would be correct. Okay, folks, you can go ahead and complete your notes checks for today. Again, remind me tomorrow to show you how to pull back that answer on your calculator, and we will see you in the morning.